Hey, thanks for clicking. This is Pal Saga. So, a man builds a life with everything he thought he needed, and then one phone call turns all of it into something he doesn't recognize. Stay to the end, and let's get into it. The sprinkler was running on the wrong day. That's the first thing I noticed when I pulled out of the driveway that morning. Tuesday. My wife had the sprinkler system set to run on Mondays and Thursdays. It had been that way for 6 years, ever since we had the lawn redone after the drought took most of it. But there it was, spinning slow arcs across the front yard on a Tuesday morning in October, soaking grass that didn't need soaking. I remember thinking I should go back and turn it off. I didn't. I was already running late for my fishing trip with my buddy Ray, and I told myself my wife would notice eventually. She always noticed things like that. That was my first mistake. Not the sprinkler, the assumption that she was paying attention to the same life I was living. My name is Gerald Holt. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, built my own small contracting business, put 2 kids through college, and retired at 61 with a pension, a paid-off house, and what I believed was a solid marriage to a woman I'd known since we were both 24 years old. Carol. We met at a church picnic in the summer of 1986. She was wearing a yellow dress and laughing at something her friend had said, and I thought, that's the one. 37 years together, 2 kids, 4 grandchildren, a house on Birchwood Lane with a garden she tended every spring and a back porch where we'd drink coffee every Sunday morning and talk about nothing in particular. I thought we were happy. Or if not happy exactly, then settled in the good way. The kind of settled that comes from building something real together over decades. Not fireworks, but something steadier. Something you could count on. I found out I was wrong about that too. The fishing trip with Ray was supposed to be 2 nights. We drove up to Center Hill Lake, a place we'd been going every fall for the better part of 20 years. No cell signal worth speaking of up near the cove we liked, which was part of the appeal. 2 old men in a boat, not talking much, watching the water. Carol knew where I was going. She'd packed me a sandwich and told me to be careful on the water. She kissed me on the cheek when I left. A normal Tuesday morning goodbye. Except for the sprinkler running on the wrong day, the call came Thursday afternoon. I'd driven into the small town near the lake to pick up a bag of ice, and my phone lit up with a name I didn't expect. My daughter, Stephanie. She was 34. Lived about 40 minutes from us in Nashville with her husband and their 2 little boys. She didn't usually call me mid-afternoon on a workday. Dad. Her voice sounded strange, pressed flat the way voices get when someone is trying very hard not to fall apart. Hey, sweetheart, what's wrong? Dad, where are you right now? Are you still at the lake? Yeah, just got into town for a minute. What's going on? There was an ambulance at your house this morning. And police? I saw it because Tyler drove past on his way to work and he texted me and I tried calling Mom, but she's not answering and Dad, I don't know what's happening. The bag of ice I'd been holding hit the floor of the convenience store. I made it back to Murfreesboro in under 2 hours. Ray drove because my hands wouldn't stay steady on the wheel. The whole way down I kept calling Carol. Straight to voicemail every time. That mechanical voice telling me to leave a message after the tone, like nothing was wrong, like the world hadn't just shifted under my feet while I was sitting in a boat watching the water. Birchwood Lane looked wrong from the end of the street. Wrong in the way that your mind registers before your eyes can fully process. 2 police cruisers parked in front of the house. A van I didn't recognize in the driveway. Yellow tape across the front steps. The kind you see on the news. The kind that belongs to someone else's story. I got out of Ray's truck before it stopped moving. Sir. An officer stepped in front of me before I reached the tape. Sir, I need you to stop. This is my house. Where's my wife? What happened? Are you the homeowner? Gerald Holt. Yes, I live here. Where is Carol? The officer's expression did something I couldn't read. He turned slightly and made a gesture to someone behind him, and then a woman in plain clothes was walking toward me. She was around my age, maybe a few years younger, wearing a gray blazer and the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing too much over too many years. Mr. Holt, I'm Detective Nguyen. I need you to come with me, please. There are some things we need to talk about. Not until someone tells me where my wife is. Is she hurt? Was there an accident? Your wife is not here, Mr. Holt. We're trying to locate her right now, but I need you to come with me. There's quite a bit I have to explain. Those words. We're trying to locate her. I remember how they landed, not like information, more like a physical thing, a weight that settled somewhere in my chest and didn't move. They took me to the Murfreesboro Police Department. Not under arrest, Detective Nguyen told me. Just for questioning. Just to get a clearer picture of the timeline. I sat in a room that smelled like old coffee and answered questions for 2.5 hours. Where had I been since Tuesday morning? Could anyone confirm I'd been at the lake? What was my wife's routine, her schedule, the people in her life? I answered everything. I had nothing to hide. But I kept asking about Carol, and they kept redirecting me back to their questions, and somewhere around the 90-minute mark I understood that the redirection was intentional. They were building something, laying out pieces before they showed me the picture. The picture wasn't good. Detective Nguyen came back into the room with a folder and a second detective, a younger man named Pratt, who took notes but didn't say much. Mr. Holt, I'm going to show you some photographs. I need you to tell me if you recognize anything. She slid the first one across the table. My living room. Or what used to be my living room. The coffee table overturned. A lamp I'd had since before my daughter was born, shattered on the hardwood floor. Dark stains on the area rug Carol had picked out on a trip we took to Chattanooga in 2019. I knew what those stains were without being told. My mouth went dry. Second photograph. The back hallway that led from the kitchen to the garage. More staining. Smeared. Like something had been dragged. I gripped the edge of the table. The third photograph was of a man. He was on his side on my living room floor, eyes closed, one arm folded underneath him. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Broad-shouldered. A face I had never seen in my life. Do you recognize this man, Mr. Holt? No. I've never seen him before. Who is he? He was transported to Vanderbilt University Medical Center Thursday morning. He was in critical condition. He is currently in surgery. He was alive. I exhaled. His name is Dennis Farr. He's 51 years old. He owns a landscaping and property management company based out of Smyrna. Do you know him? I've never heard that name in my life. Detective Nguyen looked at me for a long moment. Mr. Holt, Dennis Farr's phone records show over 400 calls and text messages exchanged with your wife's cell phone over the past 14 months. The room got very quiet. I want a lawyer, I said. Not because I had done anything. Because I suddenly understood that whatever had happened in my house had a shape I hadn't seen yet, and I needed someone in that room who was on my side before I said another word. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. My son, Kevin, drove in from Memphis the night I was released. He sat with me at a hotel we were both staying at because the house was still a crime scene, and he kept his hand on my shoulder while I tried to explain what I knew, which was almost nothing. His jaw got tight the way it did when he was trying not to show how scared he was. He'd done that same thing as a kid whenever something went wrong. Still did it at 38. Stephanie came the next morning. She held me for a long time without saying anything. When she pulled back, her eyes were red, and she looked the way people look when they have to rearrange the whole understanding of something they thought they knew. She didn't ask me if I'd known about any of it. She could tell I hadn't. My children know me. That turned out to matter more than I expected. Carol turned herself in 5 days later. She walked into the Murfreesboro Police Department with a lawyer and a prepared statement. Kevin called me from outside the hotel where we'd been waiting and told me, and I sat down on the end of the bed and stared at the wall for a long time without moving. Her story went like this. Dennis Farr had come to the house that Tuesday morning. Not at her invitation, she said. He had shown up unannounced, the way he'd been doing with increasing frequency over the past several months. Their relationship, which had begun almost 2 years ago when he'd done some work on our property, had turned complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated. He had become possessive, controlling. When she tried to put distance between them, He pushed back harder. He showed up at places she was supposed to be alone. He sent messages that made her afraid. On Tuesday morning, she said, he came to the house knowing I was gone. He wanted her to leave with him, said he'd been patient long enough. When she refused, when she told him it was over and asked him to get out of her house, he grabbed her and slammed her against the wall. She broke free and ran. He followed. They struggled. She got hold of the fireplace poker that sat in the stand near the hearth and she hit him, more than once. She didn't know how many times. She panicked. She ran to her car, drove to her sister's house 2 counties over, and stayed there, too afraid to call the police, afraid no one would believe the woman who'd been having an affair when she claimed the man she'd been seeing had attacked her. Dennis Farr was not dead. He was hospitalized for 6 weeks with a fractured skull and internal bleeding, but he survived. That changed the charges significantly. But it didn't change what Carol had done. It didn't change the 14 months. It didn't change any of it. The part I kept getting stuck on wasn't the violence. The part I kept getting stuck on was that she had packed me that sandwich. She had kissed me on the cheek. She had known, when she stood in our kitchen and handed me that brown paper bag, that the man she'd been seeing for over a year might be coming to the house while I was gone, and she sent me off to the lake anyway. I don't know what she thought was going to happen. I don't know if she had a plan. Maybe she didn't. Maybe that's the honest answer and it's supposed to make me feel better. It doesn't. I learned the rest from our neighbor, Pat, and from Carol's sister, Diane, who called me about 3 weeks after everything happened. Diane cried the whole phone call. She said she was sorry. She said she had begged Carol to tell me, that she'd told her a dozen times that it would be better coming from her than from whatever came next. Carol had kept saying she was going to end it, that she just needed more time. More time. She'd had 14 months. She'd had 3 decades. She'd had that Tuesday morning when she handed me a sandwich and watched me drive away. How long have you known? I asked Diane. About 8 months, she said, and then she apologized again. Diane's apology was the one that hit hardest, somehow. Not because I blamed her, but because it confirmed what some part of me had started to understand, that there had been a whole separate version of my life running alongside the one I thought I was living. A version where the people around me knew things I didn't, where my wife was someone I had never fully met, where my home on Birchwood Lane had been the site of something I had no idea about while I was in the garage, fixing motors and on the porch, drinking coffee, and sleeping in the bed we'd shared for 37 years. Dennis Farr filed a civil suit from the hospital. His criminal attorney made noise about pressing charges. Ultimately, the district attorney charged Carol with aggravated assault. She pled not guilty and the case went to trial. I attended every day. My son sat on one side of me and my daughter on the other, and we watched 12 strangers try to determine what exactly had happened in my living room. The prosecution argued that Carol had not acted in self-defense, that the number of blows was inconsistent with a single defensive act, that her flight and her silence in the days that followed indicated consciousness of guilt rather than the paralysis of a genuine victim. The defense argued that Dennis Farr had a documented history of volatile behavior with previous partners. His ex-wife had filed a police report 2 years earlier. A former employee had a restraining order. Carol, the defense said, had been in a relationship with a dangerous man, had tried to extract herself from it, and had defended herself when he refused to let her go. The jury took 3 days. When they came back, they found her guilty of aggravated assault, 2nd degree. The judge sentenced her to 7 years, with the possibility of early release after 4, depending on behavior and program completion. She didn't look at me when they read the verdict. I didn't look away from her. I wanted her to see that I was there. I'm not entirely sure what I wanted her to understand by that. I'm still not sure. The divorce was finalized 8 months later, uncontested. She signed everything without argument. I got the house, the savings, the retirement accounts we had built together. She retained her personal belongings, a small savings account, the car. Her attorney was professional. Her cooperation was complete. I don't know if that made it easier or harder. Some days it felt like grace. Other days, it felt like the final proof that the marriage had already been over in her mind long before that Tuesday morning. Kevin helped me gut the living room. We pulled up the rug ourselves, repainted the walls, replaced the furniture. He drove down from Memphis on a Saturday, and we worked straight through until 8 in the evening, and then we ordered pizza and sat on the new couch in a room that looked completely different, and neither of us said much. When he hugged me before he drove home, he held on longer than usual. "I need you to know," he said, "this is not who you are. None of this is on you." I thanked him. I meant it. But I also knew it wasn't entirely true, and I'll get back to that. Stephanie brought the grandkids over more often that year. I think she was worried about me being alone in the house. She was probably right to be worried. There were weeks that fall when the quiet got very heavy, and the routines I'd built my retirement around, the fishing, the garden, the Sunday morning coffee, all of them had Carol's shape still in them, and I didn't know what to do with that. You can't just reassign the meaning of 37 years. You can't just decide to feel differently about the person you thought you were. I went to a counselor, a man named Richard, around my age, who had been through his own divorce some years back. He didn't try to tell me how to feel. He just helped me figure out what I was actually feeling, which turned out to be more complicated than anger, though there was plenty of that. There was grief. There was embarrassment. There was a strange kind of loneliness that wasn't just about Carol being gone, but about the version of myself that had existed inside that marriage. The Gerald who thought he understood his life, that version was gone too, and I was having to figure out who I was without him. My grandkids helped. There's something about a 4-year-old who doesn't know anything about what happened and just wants you to get on the floor and build a train track, something genuinely medicinal about that. I'm not being sentimental. I mean it practically. You cannot spiral when there's a child pulling on your sleeve, asking you to make the train go faster. About a year after the trial, I got a letter. It came in a plain envelope with the return address of the correctional facility where Carol was serving her sentence. I recognized her handwriting on the front. I stood in the driveway for a long time just holding it. Then I put it in the drawer of my nightstand and didn't open it for 2 weeks. When I finally did, I sat at the kitchen table in the morning with coffee, and I read it twice. "Gerald, I don't have any right to ask you to read this. I know that. If you've already thrown it away, I understand. But I needed to write it, even if it only helps me and not you. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't come close to covering what I did. I know sorry is the smallest word in the English language when you're talking about a betrayal this size. But it's the only word I have, and I mean it more than I have ever meant anything. I want you to understand something. And I'm not saying this to excuse myself. I'm saying it because I think you deserve the truth, even the parts that are hard to hear. I was unhappy. Not with you exactly. With something in myself, something I couldn't name and didn't try hard enough to name. I felt invisible in a way I never knew how to explain to you. Like the life we'd built was complete and finished and there was nothing left to add to it. That was my problem, not yours. You built a good life. You were a good husband. The fact that I went looking for something in the wrong place is not your failing. It's mine. What happened with Dennis was not supposed to happen the way it happened. I made a mistake that kept growing larger than I knew how to contain. And then I was afraid. I was afraid of losing everything. I was afraid of what you would think of me. And that fear made me make choices I will spend the rest of my life regretting. I don't know if what I did in that living room was right or wrong. I think I was afraid. I think he was going to hurt me. But I also think I had put myself in a situation where being afraid was the natural consequence, and I don't get to pretend I wasn't responsible for that. Tell Kevin and Stephanie that I love them. Tell the grandkids that their grandmother thinks about them every single day. And Gerald, I know I have no right to say this, but I hope you find some peace. You deserved a better version of me than the one I gave you. I'm sorry I couldn't be her. Carol, I read it again. Then I folded it and put it back in the envelope. I finished my coffee. I went out and did some work in the garden because it was a decent morning and the tomatoes needed tying up, and I had learned by then that movement was better than stillness when my thoughts got too loud. There's something I haven't told you yet. something that took me a long time to admit even to myself. About 3 months after the trial, when the initial shock had started to settle into something more like a permanent ache, I was going through old emails, looking for something unrelated, a receipt for a tool I'd bought, and I found an email thread between Carol and a friend of hers from years ago. Nothing dramatic. Just two women talking back and forth the way women do, about life, about feeling stuck, about getting older and wondering if this was all there was. The emails were from 4 years before any of this happened. 4 years. And reading them, I had this uncomfortable, unwelcome realization. I had known. Not about Dennis Farr, not about the affair, not about any of the specifics. But I had known something was wrong. I had felt it. There had been times over the years when Carol would get quiet in a way that wasn't her normal quiet, when she would look at me at dinner with something behind her eyes that I couldn't read, and I had told myself it was nothing. I had told myself she was tired. I had told myself we were fine because fine was what I needed us to be, because our life was built and complete and I didn't want to look too closely at the foundation. Kevin told me it wasn't my fault. And in the legal sense, the moral sense, the most important sense, he's right. What Carol did, she did. Those are her choices and she's living with the consequences of them. But if I'm being honest with myself, genuinely honest, I was not a fully present husband in those last several years. I retired and I retreated. Into the garage, into the fishing trips, into the comfortable routines that let me feel like everything was handled without actually checking in. I stopped asking her how she was and meaning it. I stopped being curious about the woman I'd been married to for 3 decades. I thought I knew her. I'd stopped trying to know her. I'm not saying this to share blame. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I think the true version of a story, even the unflattering parts of it, is the only version worth telling. 2 years have passed since the trial. Carol is still incarcerated. I understand she's doing well, by the measures they use for such things. Taking classes, participating in programs. Kevin told me this. He has had some contact with her, which I encouraged. She's still his mother. Stephanie has not reached out. That's her choice, and I respect it. These things aren't simple, and I won't pretend they are. I've started dating, which still sounds strange when I say it out loud. I'm 63 years old, and I'm dating. I met a woman at a church event, ironically enough. Her name is Patricia. She's a retired teacher, 60, divorced, with adult children of her own who are cautious about her and skeptical of me in exactly the way I would hope they'd be. We've gone to a few things together. I'm not in a hurry. I don't think she is either. There's something comfortable about spending time with a person who has also lived through difficult things and come out the other side still wanting to show up. My grandkids call me Pop. I see them most Sundays now. Stephanie brings them over and I make a big breakfast and they tear around the backyard the way children should, and the house sounds different when they're in it. Fuller. The way it sounded years ago when Kevin and Stephanie were small and loud and absolutely convinced that everything interesting was about to happen any minute. The garden survived. I kept it going through everything, even the worst months. Something about going outside every day and doing work that the earth required regardless of what was happening in my life. The tomatoes came back. The zucchini got out of hand the way it always does. The roses Carol had planted along the back fence bloomed in June like nothing had changed. I left them there. Kevin asked me once if I was going to pull them out, and I thought about it. But they were good roses. They'd been there for years. The fact that she'd planted them didn't make them less alive. I received a notification last month about Carol's eligibility review, the possibility of early release in the next year. They asked if I wanted to submit a statement to the review board. I've been sitting with that question. I've decided to submit one, not to oppose her release, not to add more time to what's already been done. 7 years, or 4, isn't going to undo what happened. It isn't going to give me back 37 years of a marriage I apparently never fully understood. What's done is done, and I've learned that the hard way. You cannot live in the past, even when the past still has its hands around your throat. You have to choose the present, or you'll drown. This is what I'll say to the board. My name is Gerald Holt. I was married to Carol Holt for 37 years. We raised 2 children together, have 4 grandchildren, built a life in Murfreesboro, Tennessee that I was proud of and, I believed, that we were both proud of. On a Tuesday morning in October, my wife sent me off on a fishing trip and something happened in our home that changed everything. What exactly happened in that living room, the full truth of it, I may never entirely know. Neither may she. I am not here to argue for or against Carol's release. That is your judgment to make, not mine. I am here to say that the people most affected by what happened, my son, my daughter, our grandchildren, and yes, myself, are still finding our way through it. Some days are better than others. Some things have healed in ways I wouldn't have believed 2 years ago. Others may never fully close. Whatever you decide, I ask only that it reflect the whole of what Carol is. Not the worst thing she did. Not the best version of herself either. The true version. A woman who made serious choices that caused serious harm. A woman who is also a mother and a grandmother and someone who, I believe, understands now the weight of what she chose. We all have to keep living. I hope whatever decision you make allows for more of that. Gerald Holt. Maybe she'll be released early. Maybe she'll serve the full sentence. Either way, the grandkids will grow up. Kevin will keep calling every Sunday night. Stephanie will keep bringing her boys over for breakfast. Patricia and I will see where things go, carefully and honestly, without rushing toward anything that isn't real. And I'll keep tending the garden. I drove past the house on Birchwood Lane last month. We're still in the same house, actually. I considered selling it, like I said, but in the end, the house was mine too. My work was in those walls in the most literal sense. I ran the electrical on the addition we put on in 2003. I've fixed every outlet, every switch, every junction box in that place. I've spent too many Saturdays under that house and up in that attic to let a bad memory take it from me. So I stayed, and it stopped feeling haunted somewhere around the 18-month mark, which is maybe as fast as you can hope for. What it feels like now is just home. With a living room that has different furniture and different paint and a rug I picked out by myself, and a garden out back that blooms every June, whether I deserve it to or not. There are things I want to tell you. If you're watching this, and something in it felt familiar, not in a preachy way. I'm not a preacher. I'm a retired electrician from Tennessee who thought he had his life figured out and found out he was wrong. Ask your spouse how they are and listen to the answer. Not the answer you expect. The real answer. The one that might take a few minutes of silence before it comes, if it comes at all. Don't stop being curious about the person you chose. Don't assume that because you know someone's habits and preferences and history, you know what's happening inside them right now. People change. Marriages require attention the same way any living thing does. I stopped giving mine that attention, and I will always wonder what different choices might have led to. That's not guilt talking. I've done enough work in the last 2 years to know the difference between honest accounting and self-punishment. This is honest accounting. The affairs and the violence and the consequences, those were Carol's choices. But the drift, the slow erosion of real contact between 2 people who had stopped genuinely seeing each other, that belonged to both of us. Pay attention. Have the hard conversation before it becomes impossible. Fight for your marriage if it's worth fighting for, and be honest enough with yourself to know the difference between a marriage worth fighting for and one that has already ended and just hasn't said so yet. And if it falls apart anyway, despite everything, know that you will survive it. Not easily, not quickly, but you will. The sprinkler will run on the wrong day, and the bottom will drop out, and there will be hotel rooms and police stations and courtrooms and paperwork and grief that feels like it has no floor. And then one morning you will wake up and eat breakfast in your kitchen, and the sun will come through the window the way it always did, and the day will just be a day again. A family of 2 became 3 when Kevin's son started coming for sleepovers. 4-year-old Drew, who wants me to get on the floor and build train tracks and does not care even slightly about anything that happened on Birchwood Lane in October 2 years ago. He just wants the train to go faster. Last Friday, he fell asleep on the couch while we were watching cartoons. I put a blanket over him and sat in the armchair nearby and listened to the quiet of the house. Good quiet. The kind that has people in it even when no one's making any noise. That kind of quiet is something, after everything. That kind of quiet is actually everything. Thanks for listening. I don't know if my story helps anyone. It's not a clean story. There's no clear hero, no satisfying villain, no lesson that covers it all. Just a man who thought he knew his life and then had to find out who he was when it turned out he was wrong about most of it. If you're in something hard right now, a betrayal, a loss, a moment where the floor dropped out and the life you thought you had turned into something you don't recognize, I just want you to know that the floor comes back. It takes time. It takes more time than you think you have, but it comes back. One day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one sunrise over a garden that doesn't care what happened to you and blooms anyway. That's all any of us can do.